Let me just say, first of all, I'm going to manage your expectations a little bit. I'm not giving the TED Talk tonight, and they actually said in the little briefing that this was an award-winning TED Talk. The first thing you need to know is that the reason it's an award-winning TED Talk is because of people like David Hitt and Holly Snow. And the reason I was even there to begin with is because one of our young engineers, who I think might even be here tonight, Mallory Johnston, had a friend in Nashville that said, "Hey, why don't you come up and tell your story up here?" But my inspiration for that talk was really, I had given that team, Holly and David, a bunch of ideas over the last couple of years, and I said, I don't know how to do this, so David stood up at the front of the conference room and gave the talk. And he gave me my voice there because he actually delivered it in a way that came from the heart, and I said, that's it, there's my voice. And so for one night, I gave what they call the most the scariest talk the most scariest talk you'll ever love, or something like that, and it was pretty intimidating. I'll also want to thank Dr. Deborah Barnhart. She is one of the hardest working people I have ever met. And, you know, they say you had me at hello. She had me one night when we were up there under that Saturn V, and I just said, you have so much energy, you really care about exploration, you care about space, you care about these kids. And she says, do you know that I was sworn into the Navy standing inside that F-1 engine right there? And I thought, that somebody that cares about space that much, that when they're sworn into the Navy, they want to be standing in that F-1 engine, that tells you something about her commitment to what you see happening here. And so when you hear about this Honeywell stuff going on, or you see these kids walking around here, or you enjoy this beer garden up here, you really ought to thank someone like Deborah Barnhart, who works tirelessly. Last week when they were doing the T-38 dedication, I was here, and she called me that day and said she wasn't going to be there because she had pneumonia. She had worked herself sick, and you might have even noticed her voice was a little hoarse tonight. So I know she is fighting through that because she wanted to be here for you guys. So I'd like to give her a round of applause. So it was funny what David said about, I don't know, he said something about doing ballet and then something else in later today. I will tell you, we had a program control board this afternoon, and it was where we kind of make hard decisions. And it got kind of heated in there at one point. We were on about the 6th agenda item, and I literally just said, I can't do this. We're going to have to put this off because I got to go get in front of a bunch of people and look happy. Because we're in that phase of the program where Rickover talked about paper reactors and real reactors. Well, I can tell you the rocket's getting real because it's getting hard. He said paper reactors are always on time, on schedule, under budget. Real reactors are always lots of problems, lots of issues, worrying about whether you're going to make it or not. And so we're getting into that phase of the program. But tonight I'm going to talk to you a little bit about exploration. I'm going to talk to you about historical exploration, and I'm going to try to paint a picture for you that in some ways what we're doing today is no different than the way things have been done for hundreds of years. And so I'm going to start by talking about exploration across the seas. And this idea is the next great ship. But when you see something like this and you think about exploration, this is what I go to. This is my go-to. I grew up in Mobile, Alabama, which is down on the Gulf Coast. And my grandfather was an Air Force pilot and retired down there. And so when I was a kid, I would go down to the shore and stand there and look out. And my inspiration was seeing the horizon and seeing that there was nothing but ocean there. And you get to a place when you get 7 or 8 miles out, you look back, you can't see it. And that's pretty true of all of us out there. And this idea of exploration was always about ships and sailing. My cousin was no different. He had kind of a wanderlust. When he graduated from college, he got in a boat and started sailing around the world. And over about 8 years he actually did an Atlantic crossing by himself. And so it's kind of in our blood, this idea of going out and pushing beyond limits. So one of my favorite explorers is Captain James Cook. Are there any Trekkies out there? Any Star Wars fans? Okay. Does anybody know what name that sounds like? His name is James Cook, Captain James Cook. James T. Kirk. It's actually not just a coincidence. Gene Roddenberry traced back to that James Cook to build the character of Captain Cook in the Starship Enterprise. It's also no surprise that two of his ships were named Discovery and Endeavour, which share the names with space shuttles. That's right. So you're already starting to see, from that there's this parallel there. So another interesting thing about James Cook is if you're going to set out and sail, and he's a guy who did 3 trips and pushed the limits of exploration farther than anyone had before him, you're going to need a great ship. You're going to need a very capable and robust ship. And one of his ships, the Resolution, he actually took it down into the Antarctic. And by doing that, he almost discovered Antarctica, except they actually ran out of supplies. But he pushed further than anybody had ever pushed down into the southern hemisphere. That same ship, he took to Hawaii and pushed further. And so one ship, being very capable, will be able to go to different locations in the oceans of the world. And so in doing that, though, does anybody know the demise of Captain Cook? How he died? He died in Hawaii. There was actually a fight with the locals there, and he ended up dying. And the idea is that when you explore, it comes with risk, and when you push the limits, you do take on risk, but it is a risk worth taking because his legacy is actually long and endearing, and I'm going to show you some more of that here. So this was a map of the world during his time. One of the things you'll notice is down in the bottom right there's a beginning of an outline of Australia. We didn't really know about Australia or New Zealand in his time frame, and so the idea is that he had this concept that he wanted to go further and go as far as it was possible to go. And this is way back 300 years ago. He's saying those kind of things. I think, and you can take politics out of it. I think one of the most beautiful sentences I heard in the early Bush presidency is when he said, this idea of exploration is not an option we choose. It's a destiny written on the human heart. I think it really hit me that it is something we all have in us, this innate idea that we need to explore and to push boundaries. So there's another interesting idea about James Cook that I really like, and that is that he understood the intersection of science and discovery and exploration. And a lot of people don't know this, but his first trip, he actually was chartered by the British Royal Society. And what they asked him to do is go to Tahiti to measure the Venus transit across the sun. And that picture you see up there in the top right is from his logbook. So this is an explorer. This is a captain of a ship who is actually doing astronomy. He's doing astrophysics. He's studying the Venus transit. What I really like about that is this is exploration enabling science. The bigger picture you see here is a modern-day picture of Venus transiting the sun taken by the Hubble. And so this is a really neat science picture, but does anybody know how Hubble got up into the sky to begin with? Space shuttle, right? Human exploration. And if it wasn't for the humans on the space shuttle, it wouldn't be operating today. We wouldn't have been able to repair it. We've been there 4 times to repair it and keep it operating. For those teachers out here, I've done this. You can go out and look in just about any science textbook from about 6th grade through high school, and you're going to see Hubble images there. What you need to understand is that's human exploration enabling science. There's actually kind of a neat payback that Hubble did. There's versions of this picture out there with the International Space Station and with the shuttle transiting across the sun. The other idea that James Cook had, does anybody know what killed most explorers back in that time frame? Scurvy, exactly. Before Captain Cook and these voyages, most explorers that set off into long exploration visions did not come home. They died of scurvy. They didn't understand it. But Captain Cook took a botanist with him, a scientist, Joseph Banks, who taught them how to eat native plants and how to eat things that kept them alive. And in his 3 voyages, he never lost anybody to scurvy. That's science enabling exploration. And at the same time, Joseph Banks was able to go to all these new places and find fauna and things that nobody had ever seen before and record those for posterity. So he made new discoveries. So what's interesting about this is that this idea of scientists and explorers working together to create new discoveries and to push things forward, what happens behind that, it's very interesting. Commerce comes along, and they change the world, and they change the way we see things. This is actually a ship track of the seas from about 2 years ago. The red lines represent this is 1 year of ship tracks, and these are major cargo routes around the world. The red lines represent 1 to 200 ships. The yellow lines represent 5,000 ships. So what you see is you can almost not see the Atlantic Ocean here because of those exploration routes that were paved have been followed by commerce. And what I've noticed is that when we push with exploration and with discovery, commerce comes behind it and expands. And this idea is pretty much universal. And many times it's a partnership between the commercial folks and the government folks. A lot of times it's an early government investment. You take the Wright brothers, a couple guys that had a bicycle shop and learned to create a plane. But what really got the airplanes taken off was the idea of these airfields all around the United States. And even today, and a lot of those were built with government dollars, even today all the airfields are managed by some type of government authority. But this is airplane tracks across the United States. I saw a couple months ago a video of one day, and I didn't want to show it here because it's mainly a UK kind of thing, but it's a really cool video. It shows little tracks of every plane taking off and landing in the Eastern Europe. And the skies are just filled. And what's amazing is they now actually have to get in these lanes and fly in these lanes almost like cars on the ground. But the idea is that when you push these limits, so, you know, guys like Chuck Yeager and Charles Lindbergh get out there and push the limits, and then behind it, commerce comes. And then it forms a whole new industry. It's no different. Lewis and Clark went out and set a trail across the United States, a presidentially chartered venture. And then you fast forward many, many years from now, and Eisenhower sets up the interstate highway system. Well, that's our network. I mean, that's how stuff moves back and forth across the United States today. That's how we get wherever we're going. Bus lines came out of that. Trucks that move stuff around. And if it's not by truck, it's by rail. Now, the rail one's kind of interesting because there's a lot of intrigue in the way the rail system was set up and the whole golden spike and the way these two guys were fighting to get there. And it was a very interesting government-private partnership. The government was actually giving away land grants and things like that and helping them sell bonds to do it. But they got to a place out in Promontory, Utah, and they were going to miss each other. And they were both, these are two private guys, they were so prideful, they just weren't going to come together, and the government actually had to intervene to bring them so they would connect at the right spot. But the idea is that the pioneers and the explorers that went out there and started settling, and the forts that were put out there by the government formed a need to bring this commerce along. And today, roughly 40% of the mass times miles of stuff moved around the United States is via this railroad system. So what does any of that have to do with space? Well, I believe one of the most beautiful speeches ever given about space was John F. Kennedy in 1961, and most people know that from his famous statement about "We choose to go to the moon," and that was the rally cry. And when I lived in Houston, I saw it, but then there's another part to it in the auditorium there, in the Teague Auditorium. It says, "And do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they're hard." And I thought, well, that makes it even better. That's a really awesome speech. What I didn't realize until a couple of years ago is that he went on to say that space was the new ocean. And he says, "I intend to sail it and be second to none." And it wasn't until we started having these discussions about Captain Cook and exploration that I really understood the depth of what he was talking about there. And I got so excited about it because what I told you about David Hitt and guys like that have these great ideas on how to put things. I said, who is his speechwriter? So I went and looked up who his speechwriter was because I was pretty sure he didn't come up with it by himself. He's kind of a forgettable guy, but it was beautiful. It was beautiful the way he set that up. And so I really like this concept that space is the new ocean. And so you set this thing up and you say, okay, space is the new ocean. We're standing on the shores looking out. What do we do? What does that mean to us in terms of what exploration looks like? Well, if space is the new ocean, what are the islands and the continents that we want to go to? I would put forth that the solar system kind of looks like a set of islands of increasing difficulty in terms of distance and time it takes to get there. You look at something like the moon. And it's 290,000 miles away, and we went there 40 years ago, but we went for a very short period of time. We just kind of dipped our toes in. Today, and it's a great wonder. I worked on the International Space Station for 11 years. I've got about half my career invested in it, but it's only 200 miles away. It's less than the difference from here to my hometown, away from the Earth, and we're hours away from the ground. Beyond the moon, it really starts to get interesting. You start talking about things like asteroids, and folks have heard us talk about the asteroid redirect mission. Those can be another order of magnitude, millions of miles away. You go out another order of magnitude, so when we talk about Mars, it's tens of millions of miles away. And I'll talk a little more about Mars here in a minute, but there's another order of magnitude that we're really interested in right now, and it's Europa. It's moons of Jupiter. Does anybody know why Europa is really interesting? Water. How much water? A lot of water. Twice as much water as there is on Earth, the scientists say. And by the way, it hadn't come out yet, but if you get your new National Geographic, there's an article in there about the Europa mission that NASA's planning, and it actually talks about the SLS and the advantage that we provide because of our ability to get there in about a third the time than any other rocket out there today. So that's really important from an exploration perspective, and so I would report to you that for the last 40 years we've been hanging out in the shallows. In the concept of the ocean, maybe we're not quite getting out past the sandbar, maybe a little bit past the sandbar. We really want to go out to these new continents. So you might say, but we are. And David told you that I've worked on some missions that go out there, but they're robotic. And robots are cool. Let me tell you, I was there when Curiosity landed. I was actually next door to the control room. I was in the control room when Phoenix landed on Mars. It is really exciting. And I flew down the next day to Phoenix, and I actually saw the first images coming up from the North Pole of Mars, and it was really exciting. I was seeing things that nobody had seen. I was right there with scientists who had predicted these soccer ball-like structures on the surface, and I saw tears coming down their eyes, and it was exciting. I will tell you it was a little bit hollow because I wasn't actually there. I think there's only so much you can do with robots. I think it is great to have those photons sent back here so we can look at the pictures. But I would report to you that, and would put to you as a value proposition that putting humans somewhere like Mars is the ultimate goal. The Mars rovers, in the 10 years that they've been operating or more, which is amazing considered their initial plan was to be operated for about 90 days, they've gone about 24 miles or kilometers. Harrison Schmitt, in 22 hours of EVAs on Apollo 17, went 22 miles on the moon. And not only did he do that, but as he was moving along, he saw this red rock. And I forget the name of it. I'm not a geologist, but it's a really interesting rock because it actually had evidence, and he was a real geologist. It had evidence of the moon without being disrupted, so you could actually date the age of the moon itself. And so I would tell you that even Steve Squires, who is the principal investigator on the Spirit and Opportunity missions, will tell you that he really likes the idea of human exploration. And so I just want to leave you with that value proposition that robots alone can't do this, and that I do believe it is a partnership between the scientist and the explorer. So I like to call that Leonardo da Vinci. We talked about da Vinci being here. This is one of his quotes, "A healthy mind and a healthy body." I think of robotic exploration as exploration of the mind, but I also think we need to have exploration and discovery of the body, not of the body, but with the body itself. And so this is not a new idea either. I think Da Vinci, who was a real Renaissance man, I'm not a real Renaissance man, I think he was, understood this idea. And I think this idea of pushing the limits with exploration, but also the aspect of discovery with humans pushing the limits is a very important concept. So I usually start my talks in a lot of realms with this chart, and the reason I do is because that's actually out of the vision statement for NASA, that our mission statement is to reach new heights and reveal the unknown so that what we do and learn can benefit all mankind. And I love the fact that there's 27 countries at least represented here tonight, because at that Phoenix landing, later that night, I went to a lecture in the von Karman arena at about 2 a.m. with Buzz Aldrin. And he was just talking about his experiences of going and being one of the first couple men to walk on the moon. And one of the things he said, somebody just asked him, what was your most amazing revelation about all this? And he said, when I got home a few weeks later, they gave me newspapers from around the world, and they were all translated into English so I could read them. And he said the theme that I picked up from all of those is we did it. Not Buzz Aldrin did it, not NASA did it, not the United States did it, but we as a human race did it. It really made me realize that this idea of exploration and this mantle we keep at NASA today is for all mankind. And it is great to work for an agency that actually has that as its mission statement. For a national agency, that's a pretty neat thing. So this idea of international leadership to carry that vision and push it forward is something I believe pretty strongly in. And so we have a ship, a next great ship. James Cook would not have been able to go a mile without a ship, without a capable ship and a robust ship that was capable of going to a number of different places. And this is it. It's called the Space Launch System. One of the things I didn't mention about his ships is that many of ships of exploration back then actually came from other trades or had previous lives before they became exploration ships. Some had been commerce ships. They moved stuff back and forth across around Europe and in between Europe and China and things like that. Some were even prison ships. What's really neat about our ship is that some of it has had a previous life too. Many of you might know this. If you follow pretty closely, I see some NASA retirees out here. You know this. The engines that we're going to fly actually have already flown. These were engines that flew on the space shuttle. We have 16 of them ready to go today. The boosters that you see up the side, they're essentially the same designs that flew on the space shuttle, except they're a segment longer. They're even more powerful than the space shuttle. One of the things that does for us is actually makes our design very robust. We understand these engines. We understand these boosters. They are the most powerful of their kind in the world. They're also very reliable and safe. At liftoff in 2017, when this thing comes off the pad, it will have 10% more thrust off the pad than the Saturn V. By the time we add the upper stage and get it to full capability, it will be the tallest and most powerful rocket ever built. So why is that important? I've talked about exploration, but why did I talk about commerce? Well, we built the International Space Station. We flew to low Earth orbit for 30 years on a government vehicle with what we call government contractors. And this idea of bringing commerce up into low Earth orbit, to me, is a natural progression. It's what's happened in all these other arenas. And so at the same time NASA is building this next exploration ship to go out further, we've actually contracted with an armada of companies to bring along what we call commercial crew and cargo. And these are companies that we're giving a fixed price to deliver a certain amount of cargo to us, just like we would if it were the 7 Seas and we were to take a ship and say, if you bring me this cargo across the ocean, I'll pay you this much for it. And so we see that coming behind us now. And what's really cool about it is it's not just one person, it's a whole bunch of people. And it's thought leaders. When you hear names like Elon Musk, invented PayPal, Tesla, when you hear folks like Jeff Bezos, Amazon, 20th richest man in the world, has a company called Blue Origins. He's building a rocket to take folks up into space. Virgin Galactic. When you hear about folks named Sir Richard Branson. Right here in this arena up behind us, about this time last year, Bill Gates' partner, Paul Allen, came in and talked about his Strato launch. He's building the largest plane ever built to launch rockets from the plane. So we see this happening. We see this commerce coming behind us. And so we move on to the deeper ground and the commerce comes behind us. One of the more intriguing ones to me is a guy named Bob Bigelow out in Las Vegas. He's actually flown a couple of inflatable habitation modules into space already on Russian rockets. But he's got designs for a bigger one. It's one that's got 2 times the volume of the International Space Station. And you know what's really interesting about it? We can launch it in one launch of the Space Launch System. It took 25 space shuttle launches and 4 Soyuz in progress launches to assemble the space station we have today. So imagine the transformational capability of a big old rocket in terms of enabling something like that. So I already mentioned Europa. We're really excited about it. I've got a lot of friends at JPL. They're very excited about it as well. We've kind of developed an interesting strategic partnership. And actually what you'll see when you see this National Geographic, they'll show you 2 different ways to get there. One way on a smaller rocket takes about 7 years. On our rocket, it takes about half that time, about 2.7 years. If you're a scientist in the prime of your career, say you're in your mid-60s, do you want to wait 7 years to get there and start getting that data? Or would you rather only wait about 2 years to get it? Or conversely, is it okay to wait about 3 years and launch later and still get there at the same time? Or have an option that says maybe this folding of things up into origami is very expensive and difficult. Maybe I can build a big, robust spacecraft and not spend as much money on the spacecraft itself and actually do it for less money and get more science return. So we're very interested in the idea and the game-changing capability that this brings to the outer solar system when you get out beyond Mars with these robotic missions, so we can actually start pushing that robotic stuff out even further, faster. So, as I mentioned before, Mars is something we're all really excited about. This picture was painted by a friend of mine at Southwest Research Institute, Dan Durda. He is a real geologist, and he wants to be, for Mars, the guy that goes out and finds that rock. And I kind of want to be able to do that for him. I want him to be the Joseph Banks of this generation's exploration. I want him to be the Harrison Schmitt, that guy that goes in 22 hours finds that rock that really changes our understanding. I also want to have a ship that goes out to something like Europa and figures out, is this the kind of place where we can get water? Because what's the one thing humans can't live without for more than about 24 hours? It's water, and we need a lot of it. So if we're really going to push out in the solar system, we're going to need to go out to places like that and find it. Also, if it could be that in a place like that with all that water, there may be life there. And that would be a very interesting thing to find. One thing about Mars is Mars is not easy. Mars is actually going to be very hard. So I don't want to make it sound like a cakewalk. It took a whole nation being absolutely laser focused and dedicated to get to the moon. I believe to get to Mars, it's going to take a whole world that has all of its resources focused on doing something like this, because the rocket and the spacecraft are important. And if you're going to go the journey of 1,000 miles, you want to start with the first step. And the first step is you have to be able to get up there, and you have to be able to have a place where the crew can live safely and survive going up and coming back down. But to get to Mars, you've got to have a habitation module. You've got to have an ability to survive the radiation. You have to have the ability to land when you get there. And our current technology today, what we would call TRL-6, technology readiness for landing, we're at the limits of it. When you saw Curiosity land, that's about the limits of today's technology. We have to start looking at other things like aero capture and aero braking to be able to land bigger things on Mars. Then, and this is the one that really got me when I was talking to one of our astronauts out in Houston. He said, you know, when we've been on the surface for a few months, because you kind of have to wait until the timing's right to take off again, we're going to go get back in that rocket and blast off again. And I thought to myself, this isn't just like the moon. This is another planet that some astronauts, after walking around for a couple months, are going to go get back on this rocket and launch without a big launch structure, without Kennedy Space Center, without 20,000 people watching everything, because you've got a 23-minute delay. They're going to have to do it on their own. And we got to make sure that's going to work. Then we got to get them back home safely. We got to bring them in fast. Now, we can solve that problem with the Orion thermal protection systems. And so it's going to be a very interesting and risky prospect, but I think it's one worth doing, this idea of exploration and pushing limits. So I'm really excited that there's a bunch of teachers here. When I heard I was coming out here, I said, I hope the kids over at Space Camp really get to come over here. And there was a thing where, and Deb hit me below the belt. She said, you can have the beer in the beer garden, or you can have the kids, but you can't have both. And I said, I really like my beer. And she said, I got a deal for you. I'll bring the folks who teach those kids, and you can pass this on to them. And so I'm really glad you're here tonight, because one of the things that's really important is you got a bunch of folks like me working on this out there, and believe it or not, I'm actually one of the younger guys, but this is getting a little gray. And this is going to be a generational thing. And the kids that you guys are teaching in your classrooms right now, they're the ones that are going to be flying this. Dan Dirt is probably going to be too old to go to Mars, but one of these kids you're teaching today is going to be going to Mars. And I can guarantee you that all those folks are not just going to be Americans. There's going to be folks from other countries. We're going to need folks that know how to design these systems to solve all those other problems we talked about. We're going to need folks to operate the launch vehicles and the spacecraft. We're going to need the scientists to be ready when we start getting the data back to process that and push the limits of discovery. And so I want to say to you guys, I'm very thankful for what you do. I'm glad you're here. I hope what you learn here in your time here at this place will help inspire you to keep those kids inspired. Because quite frankly, up through about 6th grade, I think we got them. They love us. They love what we do. They love the idea of space. And then weird things start crowding in on them. iPhones and I don't know, college football and girls or guys and a lot of other things crowd into their lives and push them into other ideas. And in some ways, this is not the most glamorous thing to be the guy who does thermal protection on this kind of stuff, but we need those folks. And so what you do is prepare those kids to be that person 15, 20 years from now. So thank you for that. So this is a picture of the skyline you see outside there, slightly modified to show you what it'll look like for those kids about 20 or 30 years from now. The rocket on the far right is this rocket, which is our first launch. But you can see just to the left of the Saturn V is what we call the Block 2. Bigger and more powerful, 130 to 150 metric ton capability to low Earth orbit. That's the rocket that's going to get us to Mars. So I think one thing about exploration, the first thing you have to do is to actually be able to envision it. And so one of the things I'm trying to get across to you guys is we can envision this. We can see it. It's hard, but at least the way I grew up, that's what we do. We solve hard problems, and it's inspiring to be able to think that there are those out there that will be solving these problems.
The future is on the horizon. How will we take the next step? Every journey starts with a great ship. The Space Launch System, or SLS, will allow explorers to make greater discoveries than ever imagined. SLS will take us further than Apollo, carry more than the Space Shuttle, and enable unfathomable scientific breakthroughs. SLS stands on the shoulders of legacy systems and is teaming with industry, other government agencies, and academia to build the largest and most capable rocket in history. Cost-effective and efficiently designed, SLS will demonstrate new technology, foster innovation, and be the engineering marvel of our generation. Production of SLS is happening right now. Boosters are being built, engines are being tested, manufacturing has begun. The Space Launch System is an extraordinary undertaking in America's long and storied history of unthinkable human accomplishments. It's time to take the next step. The Space Launch System will lead the way.
So before I wrap up here, I wanted to come back around to the Kennedy speech, which I said is, I think, one of the most brilliant speeches about exploration ever given. In that speech, Kennedy mentioned George Mallory, who may or may not have actually summited Everest. But when Kennedy asked, he said, when they asked him why he did it, he simply said, because it's there. And then Kennedy went on to say, and I had to write this down because it's actually a fairly long quote. He says, well, space is there, and we're going to climb it. And the moon and the planets are there, and the new hopes for knowledge and peace are there. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on this most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked. It's still there. It's out there and it's waiting on us, and it's ours for the taking. And so I really like this as an idea of what should be behind us and kind of the wind beneath our wings as we fight through these tough meetings and actually get this thing built, because it is out there waiting, and it's a destiny written on our human hearts to do it. And so I'll leave you with this quote here from André Gide, who was a Nobel laureate. And interestingly, he kind of talks about it too. You got to have courage to leave sight of the shore. So we're excited about what we're going to do, and we hope you join us for the journey. Thank you.
Good evening. Up here.
Hey.
I'm embarrassed to say I don't know much about SLS until now, so thank you. I'm one of the educators here, and I want to bring back the most accurate information. And I was sitting here asking people I wrote, 2017, are astronauts going up in it? What's the mission timeline? So what is the timeline for the project? What can we tell our students? I'm an elementary teacher, so I see my 5-year-olds. What am I telling them when they are in the midst of loving space?
Good
What are we
question.
looking at?
So our first launch in 2017 is uncrewed. We want to take the Orion capsule out behind the moon and bring it back. So we'll actually take a human-rated capsule out further than it's been in 40 years. And the reason is we want to bring it in at full exploration velocity. So about 60% faster than you would come in from, say, low Earth orbit, which is actually really important because the faster you come in, the harder it is to actually design those systems. We also want to test the rocket out and make sure that we've got it right before we put the crew on. We'll come back around in 2021, and in 2021 we'll put crew on the rocket and take the rocket and crew on a 20-plus day mission around the backside of the moon. From that point on, this system is certified for exploration. If you want to go to the moon or to asteroids or to Mars, we now have the basic capability to get those humans back out into deep space. And so that's the plan today. Beyond that, we all know we want to get to Mars. I think we've all kind of lined up around that as a goal. There's a little bit of a discussion about what that path looks like. One of these arguments, beyond just how to design the rocket, there's a lot of folks that want to design an exploration program. And so if you're Captain Cook, right, and you're in the British Royal Society, you're having a discussion about going to Tahiti to get Venus transit stuff, or you want to go to the Antarctic, I don't care. The ship will go anywhere, right? So we got to have the ship first, and then we got to settle on how the path we're going to take. So that's what I would tell them, that this rocket system is going to be, by 2021, ready to take crew and cargo out into deep space. And remember, when we're talking low Earth orbit, it's 200 miles away. When we talk Mars, 54 million miles away. It's a completely different class of program. Yes, sir.
How does the Orion and the SLS compare to the programs that some of the other space agencies, the French or the Chinese or the Russian, are trying to put together?
Mm-hmm. That's a pretty good question. I don't make a study of the other countries. I will say that most of what you see in any other country is limited to about 3 meters in diameter, which is, and I would tell you this is about 8.4 meters in diameter. And so most of China's ambition right now, I believe, is around getting a space station built up and also that low Earth orbit. Many of their rocket systems have dual use for commercial satellites and things like that. The Russians have at times looked at very heavy lift vehicles. We've seen things on paper. I think Russia and China are probably the only two countries that have even the remote chance of building a rocket system this large. But so far, the Russians, of course, have never landed a human on the moon, and when it comes to things like robotic missions to Mars, other countries around the world have tried some 19 times and never been successful. And so the International Space Station is a place where just about every spacefaring nation can participate and be part of, and of course the Russians are a very big partner in that. And for the time being, we are actually dependent on them for getting humans to and from. And so they do have the capability to get humans to low Earth orbit and back. We have heard from time to time Chinese ambitions to have a human lunar program. It kind of waxes and wanes. I don't really know what they're doing.
Hi, right here.
Okay.
That actually segues perfectly into my question, which is, you said it would take a worldwide effort to achieve the goal of getting way out into the solar system. What, if any, is the international collaboration for the SLS, whether it be with the hardware or future missions?
Yeah, so when I said that, I didn't mean that all of it has to be a collaboration on the rocket itself. and I need to be careful. I don't want to get out in front of my bosses and say it's a worldwide effort, but I think we are on the record of saying we believe that it really does take multiple nations to be able to pull off something like this. But the idea being that the partnership could take a lot of different forms. I don't want to talk too much about the various partnerships. We actually have one that's pretty solid on the rocket itself. We've had others where we've looked at possibilities together in certain areas. Orion actually does have a partnership. This portion of Orion right here is called the service module. That's actually being provided by ESA, the European Space Agency. But then when you start talking about the architectures of doing these things, habitation modules, landers, logistics modules, solar electric propulsion pieces and things like that, I think it's pretty wide open in terms of the various things that various companies or countries can bring into play.
This will be our last question. We don't
Okay.
want to mess up your opportunity to go get some beer. So.
Okay. Oh, there's still beer. Okay.
Hey, Todd. So first off, I want to thank you and Team SLS and Team Marshall for your faithful service and your willingness to persevere and allow us to realize the next step in our greatest journey. So thank you all for that. I know we've got some retirees here that we're on their shoulders, so thank you.
Okay. Well, I would say in answer to that, we do stand on the shoulders of giants, and some of them are here tonight. I see guys like John Thomas. I saw Al Rice. I see astronauts like Jan Davis here, if I missed some of you. Those folks set a great example for us, and all we're trying to do is keep up that legacy for them.
With that,